the Zoom room, so we'll get started in just a second. Hello, welcome, welcome. We'll get started in just a few seconds, everybody. All right, we'll let people keep filtering in, but we'll go ahead and start. Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm the Director of Events at Politics and Prose Bookstore, and I'd like to welcome you all to PNP Live and wish you a Happy New Year. I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items before we start. First, I'm going to drop links in the chat where you can purchase a copy of all of the authors that are appearing tonight, all of their books. And if you live in the DC area and you don't feel like waiting for shipping, you can choose in-store pickup and you can come get your book from any of our 3 locations around the district. Also, if you'd like to ask any of our authors a question, if you hover over the bottom bar on your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A button. And if you could put your questions there, we will get to those in the later portion of tonight's event. All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. First, Ashley Audrain is the former publicity director of Penguin Books Canada. Her book, The Push, was just chosen as a Good Morning America book club pick, and the film and TV rights have already been sold, so make sure you get a copy and read it before it hits screens. It is a tense, page-turning psychological drama about the making and breaking of a family, and a woman whose experience of motherhood is everything she feared it would be. Next is Liz Moore, author most recently of Long Bright River, which was named one of Barack Obama's favorite books of the year, and it was also a GMA book club pick. Alternating its present-day mystery with the story of 2 sisters' childhood and adolescence, this book is a gripping suspense novel that is also a moving story of sisterhood, addiction, and the formidable ties that persist between place, family, and fate. And last but not least is Amy Malloy, whose first book, The Perfect Mother, quickly became a New York Times bestseller, and her latest novel, Goodnight Beautiful, was just published this past October. It is a psychological thriller featuring a newly married woman whose life is turned upside down when her husband goes missing. So please help me welcome all of these 3 amazing writers to PNP Live. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So I want to start just by kind of going around and having each of you give kind of a synopsis and some context on each of your books so that people here who maybe haven't read them can kind of see what everyone is about. So Liz, do we want to start with you?
Sure. So Long Bright River, as you said, Brittany, is the story of 2 sisters who live in the neighborhood of Kensington here in Philadelphia, where I live. Kensington is a neighborhood in Philadelphia that's been particularly hard hit by the opioid crisis. And the older sister is a police officer who patrols the district of Kensington. And the younger sister is suffering from addiction at the start of the novel and doing sex work to support her addiction. And she goes missing at the same time that a series of murders of women who fit her demographic is occurring. So the older sister, Mickey, despite their long estrangement, takes it upon herself to go searching for her younger sister. And a very brief kind of background for why and how I came to this material is that in 2009, when I first moved to Philadelphia, I was invited by a photographer friend to visit Kensington as part of a photojournalism project where he was making portraits of a lot of the residents of Kensington, and he wanted a writer to accompany him a few times to conduct interviews with the subjects and get their histories. So I did that and subsequently returned to the neighborhood a lot on my own and ended up leading free writing workshops at a women's day shelter in the neighborhood. So all of those experiences in Kensington combined with my own family's history of addiction sort of formed the initial seeds of inspiration for the novel.
Awesome. Amy, do you want to go next?
I'm going to be right back with you.
Sure.
Yeah, so Goodnight Beautiful is, it's the story of Sam and Annie, who are newlyweds, and they leave New York and they move to a small town in upstate where Sam grew up. And he is a therapist, and he he opens a home office, a private therapy office, and where he sees clients all day. And meanwhile, Annie, his, bored, intelligent wife, is trying to figure out what to do. And it turns out that there's a vent in the ceiling of Sam's office through which every word can be heard upstairs of the sessions that he's having with therapy with his patients. And it's a small town, so there's a lot of small town intrigue, and listening in sort of reveals the secrets of all these people in the town. And then one day, this beautiful young woman shows up as a new patient, and she tries to seduce Sam, and she asks if they can meet, and he agrees, and then he goes missing. And so the second part of the story, is sort of Annie's search to figure out if he left her, as like the town thinks, because of his reputation, or if something more sinister has happened.
And Ashley, today is your publication day, so congratulations. Tell us a little bit about The Push.
Thank you. So The Push is about a woman named Blythe Connor, and she comes from a history of women who have struggled greatly with motherhood. And she's determined that she will be, the very warm, present, sort of engaged mother that she never had. And so she and her husband, Fox, welcome a baby named Violet. And it's not long before Blythe starts to realize that there's something wrong with Violet. She's very aloof and just not attached. She's quite an angry little girl. And soon she starts to see that Violet demonstrates some malicious behavior with other children. The problem, of course, is that her husband can't see what she can about their daughter. And he thinks this is very much a result of her maternal anxiety and sort of the fear she has about motherhood kind of coming out. So they have another baby, Sam, and in that baby, Blythe finds that sort of maternal connection she'd always hoped for until something goes terribly wrong in the family, and they're sort of forced to look at, who their daughter is and who Blythe herself is, and what has happened, and the family sort of unravels from there. So it's very much a story about, I think, sort of the expectations of motherhood and how we're sort of taught motherhood is going to look and feel and how we're going to be as mothers, and what happens when, like, for so many of us, that turns out to not necessarily be the case. But it also really kind of explores, nature versus nurture and what we owe our children in that context. And importantly, I think looks at, the idea of what happens when we don't believe women or we don't make space for women's truths and how that can feel and how isolating that can be. Yeah.
And all of your books are so different, but they also deal with a lot of the same themes. Like family comes up a lot, marriage comes up a lot, motherhood. Can you each kind of tell me what drew you to this genre? I'm going to call it psychological thriller, but I know there's so many other things that go into it. But what made you each want to write this kind of book?
I could start. For me, it was my debut. The Perfect Mother came out in, when was it? 2 years ago. What is that? 2018, I guess. And that was, a story. It takes place. The setting is a group of new moms in Brooklyn, and they join this mom group, and they decide to go out for a drink one night for the first time, leaving their 6-week-old babies. And while they're out, one of the babies gets snatched while he's sleeping, and his nanny had fallen asleep. And so I think that was, for me, I had just had 2 little kids, and I was I go through these periods, I think, of having a lot of trouble reading. And I was definitely in one of them. I had 2 kids under 2, and it really does sound cliche, but I picked up Gone Girl, and I had never read in the genre before. And I just thought it brought me back to reading in a way that I really appreciated. And I thought it was so smart. And I thought she was able to really capture all these themes in this page turning, way of suspense. And for me, it was just wanting to kind of to try and do that, to be able to use that, that part of the craft to really explore, to explore bigger issues. And so that's what sort of got me into it in the beginning.
Ashley, me? Okay. Yeah, it sounds like we all have kids that pops up in our writing a lot. The reason that I excused myself a second ago is because I realized I had forgotten to turn off the sound on the baby monitor on my nightstand. So I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, and your question was about why I decided to start writing suspense. Suspense is a new genre for me in certain ways. Long Bright River is my fourth novel, but the first one that's ever been positioned as suspense. And I believe that that's because it definitely borrows, from the conventions of police procedurals and also thrillers, crime dramas. Primarily because the main character is a police officer, so it's kind of an obvious fit with that genre. That said, I sort of feel like I've always written mysteries, just not in a way that's immediately recognizable. So my previous books, especially the most recent two, Heft and The Unseen World, contained within them family mysteries about parentage or identity or sort of family secrets that come out over the course of the book, but weren't as obviously thrillers because nobody went missing and nobody died, and it didn't really intersect with what we typically think of as a thriller. Long Bright River, as soon as I realized that my main character was a police officer, which actually took me a while. At first, she was a teacher. I sort of thought, okay, this is going to be my exploration into traditional crime fiction. And, I've always been an avid consumer of crime fiction and also crime film, police films, detective films, and television. And so it was kind of my chance to figure out what I was going to do that felt new with those conventions. And that's when I really leaned in hard to Long Bright River and decided this is going to be my family drama meets crime drama. Thank you, Melissa. I just noticed your chat.
Ashley, what about you? What drew you to this genre?
Yeah, well, similar. I mean, I actually didn't really set out to write a psychological thriller, and it took me a while to sort of realize that that's what this was, or that it was heading in that direction. I really wanted to write about motherhood. I mean, it really just started about wanting to write about that idea of expectations and motherhood and what happens when it's not what you think it will be. And I think once I started writing, I realized how closely fear and motherhood are linked. They're almost, as hard to separate as love and motherhood in some ways. And I think the two mothers on this panel will probably agree with me that, there's so much fear tied up in that experience of, the things you worry about for your child, the constant danger you see, and just, bigger fears as well. And so, of course, once I started writing, it becomes clear that sort of that psychological thriller or that sort of emotional suspense is what the novel was going to be, because fear is at the root of those novels as well, or those kinds of books as well, and kind of tapping into those fears, starting with, a seed of a fear that we can all relate to and kind of taking them to a more extreme place, which is what I think this book does. And I think I also wanted Blythe's mindset to be quite gray. I wanted there to be a lot of ambiguity in terms of what the reader believed about her, and even what she believed about herself and what she believed the truth to be. And again, that sort of as kind of through revisions and as kind of, going through kind of peeling back the layers of the novel, that just fits so well with that kind of psychological suspense genre. So it wasn't so intentional, but sort of ended up in that space.
And Liz mentioned that all of you are mothers, and I mean, Amy and Ashley, you have books specifically about motherhood, and so what is it about that topic that lends itself so well? I mean, Ashley, I know you said that fear is kind of at the base of like becoming a parent and taking care of another life, but what about it made you decide like this is going to be the central kind of theme of a book that is suspenseful?
Well, yeah, for me, as I said, it was sort of just what I wanted to write about. And it's sort of, I was so sort of, that was just where my mind was. And that was where the kind of the most authentic writing sort of fell for me, I guess. I think also there's, as a mother, I think there's so few other avenues to kind of write about fear or to express fear in motherhood. And I think that's why books about motherhood in this genre are so popular with readers and with writers. I think it's because it's sort of one of the only spaces where we can go dark with motherhood and we can get to kind of the root truths of what it's really like. And we've seen that in some other books in the genre, like Amy's included. There's not really an invitation to sort of explore that anywhere else kind of in life or society. It's sort of that place where it works so well and it's so accepted. So there's kind of a natural fit there. I think also there's something about sort of mothers and daughters that I wanted to write about as kind of like an offshoot of sort of that mother theme. It's I think the relationships between mothers and daughters are so complex, like maybe the most complex relationship there is, and so emotional. And, there's something about how much we see of ourselves and our mothers, whether we like it or not. And also, I think there's something interesting to me about how well we think we know our mothers. And yet, the lens through which we understand them is so narrow because we don't really know our mother's full identity because we didn't know them before they became mothers. So that relationship really interested me, and that's sort of why I wanted to go down the route of motherhood, but sort of looking at those different generations and how each mother sort of is holding on, how each daughter is sort of holding on to their own mother's experience.
Amy?
Talk a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, although Long Bright River isn't as directly about a parent-child relationship, there's definitely one that's central to the story. And it was very important to me. I was the parent of a baby when I was really in the heart of the writing and trying to work. I teach full-time as well, and obviously writing. And it was very important to me to center the protagonist's childcare struggles because that's often, I find, not so much in women's writing, but like, especially with police procedurals, like so much of that gets taken care of off screen. You're like, wait a second, where are your two kids right now? Like it's, they would be home from school. It's late afternoon, it's evening. Like you can't be just leaving your house. So the balance in Long Bright River was being true to what I knew as the mother of a young child and now two young children, while also not being sort of like repetitive and boring. But I made a promise to myself that every time I needed to take care of what the kid would be doing, like I had to take care of what that kid would be doing and who would be watching him. And in the end, that character who serves sort of like a caretaking role also becomes central to the book and the plot even. So that was sort of a happy accident, but it was through the lens of I have to be true to what the experience of being a parent, especially a single parent, is. I'm not a single parent, but I wanted to kind of honor the experience of somebody who was.
Well, and your book also focuses on sisters, and sisters also I have two, and sisters also have a very complex relationship with each other. There's a lot of kind of inbred competition and kind of comparisons, the mother-child relationship as well.
Yes. I saw someone ask
Amy,
if Saint
have
is
anything
behind
to
me,
add?
but it's not.
No, I mean, I think I agree with what, with my first book, I really wanted to explore kind of this dark side of motherhood because you just don't understand how terrifying it is, I think, until it happens. And then you're just worried all the time. Like my kids are, what are they, 6 and 7 or something. And I still like go and, put my hand on their chest every night just to make sure they're breathing and that. Mm-hmm. And so for Goodnight Beautiful, which is my latest one, they, it's about a couple and they don't have kids. And it was, it's like, I had to make that choice because like Willa says, like, you're always like becoming a parent, I think just changes things so much and it changes the story. So, in this book, it was about, it's a newlywed couple who are kind of contemplating whether to have a kid. Because I think once you put a little kid in the book, like it just has to be like it becomes about that relationship because it's so overwhelming. Yeah, there was a question about is that the book Saint X Behind Liz, which I'm reading now, which is
I've heard it's very good. I don't have it. I wonder which book looks like it. Any guesses? Which book looks like Saint X?
Oh, actually, it's that green and orange one that looks like it.
Oh, this is The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. Excellent.
Ah.
I recommend it.
Oh, good. Yeah. We'll just sell other people's books.
Right.
That kind of really organically goes into my next question, because I feel like female authors have really been dominating this genre for so long. I feel like it was Stephen King. And now we have, just like this panel here, it was so easy to find 3 amazing selling, really interesting psychological thriller books by women. And it's also interesting to me, I'm a big true crime fan, and women make up the large amount of the audience for that. And they kind of say that it's because women are more often than not the victim of crime. So we like to read it to kind of like be a step ahead. But why I feel the same way about this kind of genre, that women are really very interested in this and they make up a larger portion of the readership for that. And why do you think that is? Why is this so appealing to women readers?
I mean, I think it's, women, I think the world is a more dangerous place for women than it is for men. And, I think from the time that you become aware of that, which is pretty young, unfortunately, for most of us, that you're used to kind of having to kind of play out scenarios in your head constantly. It's like Ashley said, I think writing these sort of darker books is a way to, control the darkness. Like when I first, with Goodnight Beautiful, when I started to write it, it was like right after the last election. And then as things got sort of darker in our nation, I felt like I actually threw away a version of the book because it wasn't dark enough. And I wanted it to be like much more darker and much like about trauma, much more. And, and my husband was always like, it's weird that you're kind of like, in your free time, you're kind of going into this darkness. And I think it was a way to kind of like control it and to be like, well, at least I have this little world. I know how it's going to end. And I can, I can puppeteer everything there. And it's a way of, I think, like feeling a little bit more in control when things are dark, or even, the things you worry about are dark.
I agree. And I think also a lot of it is, I guess, the same reason why I like this. The reason people like to read about the darkness is the same reason that I like to write about it, which is, to your point, Amy, is I found something very sort of therapeutic about writing through fear and anxiety, like the fear and anxieties that I have, and that I think a lot of women do. And so I think as readers, it's sort of the same thing. It's uncomfortable. And, you read about or hear people say a lot of the time, like, I had to put the book down, but we almost crave that experience at the same time. There's something very satisfying about reading something that you have to put down as well. It's sort of this, balance. And I think, it's sort of more of a psychological kind of working through those fears. So I think that's why these kinds of books really appeal, especially to women. And there's not a lot of other avenues to express that, or to talk about that or feel that.
Not a safe space anyway.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. Yeah.
And I think it's also really interesting that this genre has seen so much success on the big and small screens. I mean, books like Gone Girl and A Simple Favor, Big Little Lies, Sharp Objects, Rebecca. I mean, all these books that were turned into either movies or miniseries get these stellar casts, Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman and Blake Lively, and they're blowing up. And then of course it also helps sales of the book. What do you guys think anything is lost when you take a suspenseful book and turn it into a TV show or a movie? Or does the adaptation bring the story to life in a way that the book can't?
I think there are some really excellent book to screen adaptations and some really terrible ones. I won't name names. Maybe afterward we can chat. But yeah, I am curious about Amy and Ashley's experience with having their books optioned. And whether if your books have been optioned, whether you're doing the writing, whether you're part of the adaptation. I've been on both sides of that equation, where I've had books optioned where I was not part of the writing. Most of earlier in my career, that was always the case, and none of those books made it to production. With Long Bright River, I've always been a part of the writing, and I can't speak on the record about much, but it looks promising that it will be produced hopefully, although I should have learned my lesson by now. I'm excited to be part of the writing, and I'm excited to sort of treat it like an entirely new, I hate the word product, but to be able to completely reimagine or reinvent it is actually quite exciting. I think the two different media require two different things, and I'm very, very excited to use as few words as possible and to rely much more heavily on the visual. And my hope is that we get a really excellent stylish director and director of photography who can imagine this world visually in a really transcendent way. So yeah, I would love to like nerd out about what shows I love, because I love a lot.
Me too.
How about you two? Are you involved in screenwriting at all?
I'm actually, that's what I'm doing right now is I'm adapting Goodnight Beautiful.
Cool.
That's so cool.
Like you said, it's Hollywood confounds me. And, I have a lot of conversations with people and I'm like, I don't know what just happened, but
right.
I'm trying to do the adaptation myself. And so we're getting ready to pitch it to studios. And so I'm having to figure it out. And
as a feature?
What?
As a feature, like feature film, like a film length? Cool.
Now that I'm in the middle of it, I'm like, this would be a better series, but yeah. And I hope they're not listening, but I don't have any idea what I'm doing, but it's really fun. I mean, part of the issue with this is with Goodnight Beautiful, if you read it, there are like two really big twists that make it kind of hard to film. And so I'm having to figure out how to address that. But I think it's the thing that's great about adapting, I think, your work is like you get to kind of stay with these characters that you have spent a shitload of time with, like over 2 years or whatever, and you can stay with them. And the bad part is that in doing it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have done this differently in the book, and it's kind of killing me. Like I'm just like, shoot, why did I'm having these ideas now that I'm like, this would have been better. So that's a little painful, but yeah, maybe I can talk to you later because I really don't know what I'm doing. Ashley, are you doing yours?
No, I'm not. So for the reason that for many reasons, but I wouldn't have known where to start. I would have felt like you, Amy, and you're brave to take that on. Good for you. That's great. And Liz too. So I guess one of the decisions I was sort of making when looking at the options was sort of film versus TV. And kind of just trying to decide, based on my kind of limited understanding of how it all works, like where would it best live. And I sort of went with TV to do a limited series. So that's what I've optioned it for with the producers who have done Marriage Story and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Harry Potter. So kind of a span of kind of projects. And I really, I felt TV was the way to go because I wanted to make sure that I hope that we will really capture those nuances in the characters, and especially in Blythe's experience. I wanted to be careful about, I really wanted to kind of keep the empathy for her that I hope the reader has when they're reading the book. That was important to me. And it was something that I talked to the producers a lot about. And we all sort of felt like we could keep some of those nuances and kind of keep the empathy for her better in a series. So that's sort of what we decided to do, or the direction we've decided to go. So it's still early, and like everything, like you guys know, I mean, you just kind of cross your fingers and hope this stuff happens, and know there's a chance that it won't, but hopefully it will. So it's exciting, definitely. When I was talking to some producers, some of them felt like, wanted me to kind of go for it and write it myself. And I just felt like I was wasn't in the right mind frame to kind of take that on, and I want to treat this experience very much kind of learning from whoever does take it on to write the screenplay, which we're looking at that right now. And so, yeah, I'm excited about it. I love, watching or just totally binging on these series and the movies of a lot of these books that have turned into shows. And yeah, we can talk offline about our favorites or not, but there's been so many lately, and I was really inspired by those, just kind of writing, just even, I think there's a lot, it can look so differently. I think some of them are so different than the book, and some of them I like a lot more than the books, to be honest, because I think even the actors and just the writing just can bring a totally different look at some of these stories. So I love watching them too. It's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing the push if it happens, hopefully.
And some of them go completely off book. I know Big Little Lies was, one book, and then it just blew up and got really popular. And so they had to kind of create more plot for more seasons, even though, there was nothing kind of left from the book that they could pull from. You don't have to tell me which ones you don't like, but do you have any favorites? My husband and I just finished The Undoing, and we watched it way too fast, and it's a little embarrassing how fast we watched it.
Did you like it?
I did. I liked it a lot, and I think it was a really interesting, to me, and my husband actually realized this, that it was, well, I don't want to spoil anything, I guess, for someone who hasn't seen it, but it was an interesting commentary on how we are, as a society, so desperate to exonerate the handsome, rich white man that we will look for anyone else to have done something or any reason to, exculpate him when it was, that's just ingrained in us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But which ones, do you guys have any favorites from the last couple of years?
I really loved Little Fires Everywhere. I thought that was really well done. And it was a book that I loved. And I thought, again, there was some pretty substantial changes actually to the plot and to some of the characters. But I thought the scenes that they added in the show kind of brought some of the core kind of themes to the next level. They could really get more, draw out some of the racial microaggressions that were much more present in the series, and also just the anger, like the rage of the mother at the end of Reese Witherspoon's character. I think was a really powerful scene, and so I think that's what kind of these series can do. They can kind of bring some of these scenes kind of to the next level because you're visualizing the emotion, you're hearing a lot of this emotion. So that one really worked for me.
Amy?
I'm like the only person in the world who doesn't watch these shows.
That's fine.
Have not seen The Crown or any of this. But we did watch The Undoing, and it was kind of like I was saying with these guys. It was both of their books kind of brought me back to reading at a time where I was having trouble reading, and The Undoing was that. It was the first show really that my husband and I were both we couldn't wait till Sunday. I think the ending was I think there's a lot. I think the storytelling in that was fascinating, and I didn't read the book, but I think that it was really brave, kind of. It was frustrating and brave, both, I think, in how that whole story unfolds. I
think the first season of True Detective, adapted by Nick Pizzolatto, was a master class in television, period. And I know people had difficulty with the ending of it. But I loved the ending of it. I will talk your ear off about why I think the ending was kind of perfect. And the third season too, that wasn't an adaptation, but the third season was also good. Here's a weird adaptation: Fargo. I guess a film to television series adaptation, which is a strange. I love how they completely reimagined the idea of Fargo the film into Fargo the TV series, and I really like all the seasons of that.
I liked the first season the best of that one.
Yeah. What, Ashley?
Liz, did you watch Unbelievable, that series? Unbelievable.
I watched the first 2 episodes of it and didn't continue for no particular reason. I think I liked it well enough. But what?
Yeah, it reminded me a bit. I thought of that series a few times when I was reading your book.
Okay, yeah,
just that kind of mother detective or police character, and sort of we were talking earlier about kind of that balance between the role of a mother and kind of that caretaking and that police job. Yeah,
I'll have to return to that. Yeah.
Since you brought up motherhood again, we do have a lot of questions from the audience kind of about motherhood. And one of them, Wilford asked, did any of you get inspiration from your real mom life, or any journals you kept when you were raising your children, or anything from your own lives?
Yeah, I can answer that. I definitely did. Although I will say that my experience is not at all like my character, and my kids are nothing like that kid. Yeah. Yeah. And I should say as well, because my mom's watching this, my mother is nothing like the mothers in the book. So I feel like that's important to clarify for her. But I started writing this book when my son was 6 months old. And so I was very much kind of in the thick of a lot of the things that my character was going through. And in those days when I didn't have much time to write, there was, like a handful of hours here and there in the week. All I wanted to do was kind of write through, a lot of the kinds of things that I was going through. And I feel like a lot of those scenes, even though I revised the book, what feels like 1,000 times, I feel like a lot of those scenes that I wrote in those early days when I first started writing with my son have stayed and obviously they've changed, but that the core of those scenes are still there in kind of Blythe's newborn days as well. So it was definitely applicable for me.
For me, there was a lot of stuff about sleep training practices that made its way into the book, and just like the battle over, like, am I going to damage my kid either way? Like if I have no rules about sleep, or if I have too many rules about sleep. I remember that was like a huge struggle I was having when I was writing a lot of the scenes about the young son in Long Bright River. And again, just like sort of the constant struggle for childcare and figuring out what you're going to do with your kid when there's a snow day that you don't have and the kid does, and stuff like that.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's not this. So Goodnight Beautiful is it's like I said, it's about like this husband and wife, and he's the therapist, and they leave New York and they move to this small town, and he opens up a private practice like basically in the basement. And when I was writing it, I was living in New York. Like I wrote the whole thing, we're living in New York, but my husband is actually a therapist, and we have actually since moved to this really small town, and he is really like setting up a private practice. And then COVID struck, and he now really is like seeing people in the basement over Zoom.
You just can't go missing.
It's very weird because we have this weird like farmhouse that there's not a lot of insulation between, like it's all beam ceilings and stuff. So if I wanted to, I could actually like listen to his Zoom sessions, and I don't. And he sees like mostly teenage boys. So I'm just like, oh, I don't even want to go there. Like what it is like for these guys. So, but it's kind of funny because people are reading this and they're like, wait, isn't your husband a therapist? And like, he lives in this small town and stuff. And so all of his patients, I don't listen in, but I never thought about it.
How did you guys find the time to write, being a mother and having young children and having lives outside of this? Someone asked if you guys have other jobs. Most writers do, because writing a book for 2 to 5 years doesn't pay the bills, unfortunately. So kind of two-part, what are your backgrounds in other than writing, and how did you find the time to even get it done?
Ashley, do you want to go?
Sure. So my background is in public relations and publicity. So I had always, sort of since I graduated college, worked at public relations agencies and doing marketing, and then worked at Penguin Canada in publicity. I was the director of publicity there for a few years, which obviously has come in very handy now because I've had such an incredible sort of firsthand experience of what publishing is like, kind of behind the scenes. But I didn't start writing the book, as I mentioned, kind of until he was 6 months old. We have a year-long maternity leave here in Canada, which is incredible. And so, yeah, I was sort of in that space when I started writing, and then never went back to my job. But after that, I did make writing a priority at that point, because I was, full-time, obviously taking care of him, and then had a second child shortly after. So I wasn't someone who really could write during nap time or once they went to bed, because I was exhausted and I just couldn't, my brain was not functioning at those times of day. I found that very difficult. But it sort of comes back to the babysitting thing that Liz was talking about. We had childcare, for a handful of hours, a couple times a week at the beginning. And that was a privilege to have, for sure. And it was immensely helpful in writing, because I just had to kind of make a very conscious decision that if I wanted to write this book and make this happen, I needed to use those hours for writing. And so this wonderful character, she would come in the door and I would like run past her on the way out the door with like my laptop under my arm and just go to the coffee shop and write in those small bursts of time that I had during the week. And that's sort of how it got done. And it took a long time. I mean, I worked probably for over 3 years before I was at the point where I felt like, it was finished enough to kind of send to agents. So it took a while. It's not the fastest way to write a book, but I was lucky to kind of have those pockets of time for sure to write.
Liz?
I feel similarly. I am just I think everything feels pressurized when you introduce young children into your life. So I feel like I have to talk about pre-pandemic and post or during pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I've always taught full-time. I was teaching at a small university called Holy Family in Philadelphia for 7 years. Now I teach full-time in Temple's MFA program. So I try to just schedule my writing time around my teaching time. At Temple, I usually teach, my heavy teaching days are 2 days a week, and I try to do most of my writing the other 3. Pre-pandemic, all pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I also would go out of the house and write in coffee shops with white noise, and would just very carefully, like Ashley, budget my writing time and think I'm going to spend these 3 hours doing nothing but writing. And I would disconnect from the internet, turn on Freedom, which many of you probably know, but for those who don't, it's a program that like forcibly babysits you and disconnects you from the internet, which I rely on because like many of us, I am addicted to technology. So it turns your computer into a word processor effectively. So for like 3 hours at a time, I would do that. Post-pandemic, all of that went out the window. Like many or most people, we had no childcare for a long time. We both were continuing to have our full-time jobs remotely. We had 2 kids under 4, and there was no writing. I couldn't do it. I spent about 6 months not writing at all. Slowly, we've brought a babysitter in, and now I am able to write again. So that's it. I think the overall answer is you just budget your time. You dedicate however many hours to doing nothing but writing, and you don't allow yourself to get distracted by anything.
Yeah. I mean, I really, writing is a job, and just like my husband or anybody, it's like, this is my job and we're going to do what we need to do so we could both work, whether it's we juggle the kids or, whatever it is. But for me, I was doing ghostwriting before I wrote The Perfect Mother. So I was writing nonfiction books, often for people who, have a story to tell, but they're not writers. And so they hire people like me to write their book. And then, they tell the story to it. So, early on, it was just having to kind of claim, I think when you're writing, it's I don't know, it's a complicated thing. And especially when you're writing fiction, because the only way to ever get paid for it is to do it. And then later, hopefully you're going to get paid for it. And so it's hard to kind of take yourself seriously. And it's hard for other people, I think, sometimes to take it seriously. Because, did you guys read Writers and Lovers by Lily King?
Mm-hmm. I loved that.
So good. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm not going to read a story about some young woman who's trying to write a novel. Like, and I loved it so much. And I think it really captures like the internal life of somebody who's trying to take on any sort of creative project. But I think there's a lot of that, and it's having to just like claim that time and claim like the confidence and be like, whatever it takes, like, this is what we're doing because this is what my job is going to be. And, I think that's what there's a question in there, like, what's your advice to people who want to write? And to me, that's the advice, like, write, like claim it and take it seriously and treat it like a job so that it can hopefully someday become your job.
Liz, you made me miss the days of going and writing at coffee shops, like something so simple, but I miss it so much.
I miss it a lot.
One day.
Yep, I know.
Here are 2 more questions that kind of go hand in hand. First, Laura asks, I love books with good twists and probably equally love figuring out the twist in advance and when it's revealed by the story. How do you come up with plot twists that make the readers go, OMFG? And then kind of a similar question, how do you plot your stories and how much planning is involved?
Amy, do you want to answer? We were talking about Amy as being the master of the twist before this started, so maybe Amy can answer that one.
I mean, so for my recent book, Goodnight Beautiful, I actually had to write an entire different version of it before I realized who the characters were, and then therefore what the twist is, which my book is super hard to talk about because it's like it's hard to talk about because of the twist. But I mean, for me, it took me like a whole year of kind of living with this situation, and then figuring out that, I don't know, I do have some sort of like mental illness, I think, where I really like to kind of try and be tricky. And I don't know, it's just comes naturally to me. This book that I'm writing now, I'm actually having to force myself to just like, I don't want any twists in it. Like that's my thing, is I just am trying to not do that. And it's hard. My brain just kind of goes there. I'm like, well, I could make this person think this, but really it's this. So I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's a weirdness.
I will say so far to this point in my writing life, I've never worked from an outline. I just sort of like, I know who my characters are. I know where they are in time and place, and I know what their initial problem is. So in the case of Long Bright River, I knew it would be two sisters, one a cop, one addicted to opioids, in Kensington, Philadelphia in the present day, and the younger sister goes missing. And that's kind of all I knew. And I moved forward from there, making many mistakes along the way, bringing them back to the last point that felt right, and then proceeding apace. And therefore, when it came time to I guess there are twists in Long Bright River. And each time I came to the realization of what one was, like Amy, it sounds like I had to kind of go back and rewrite everything I'd written so far to accommodate that twist, which is a slow process. But to me, that's sort of how that's how twists feel both earned and surprising, is if, they initially surprise the author too, and then the author does the legwork to make it happen. And
then you go back and reread the book and you're like, oh, there were some Easter eggs and
a few little breadcrumbs. Yeah.
Yeah. Ashley?
Yeah, I agree with Liz. I think, a lot of it kind of came to me through revisions. I think it was really just revising over and over and over again, and then kind of going back and trying to make it fit and make it stronger, and kind of, build it that way. I think obviously we won't give anything away. There's a twist at the end. And I didn't know that was going to be the ending when I was writing. It kind of came to me later on. So yeah, I think like Liz said, I kind of let myself sort of be surprised about where the book was going, and hopefully the readers feel that way as well. It feels a bit more natural. Yeah.
Wait, can I ask you a question? And I know that your book came out today, so people are they're lucky that they get to read it. But I think you have one of the best last lines, like in any thriller, whatever. Like it was so good. And did you know that that's where, like, when did that come to you, at the end or at the beginning?
No, at the end. Yeah, at the end. That didn't come until quite late. And that the very end sort of came to me. I actually, with a reader, I have a dear friend who was a wonderful reader and kind of was helping me sort of, we were chatting through like how it could really feel differently at the end in like an earlier draft. And we just kind of, it just, after that, I had this conversation with her, and I remember being at this coffee shop and having this conversation with her, and then kind of like wandering around after and just being like, oh, I've got it. Like, I know exactly what's going to happen at the end. And just felt really kind of inspired by just sometimes that, I don't know if that happens to you guys, but I feel like if I have a kind of a conversation about something I'm trying to solve or something I need for my writing, if I kind of talk it through out loud and then just kind of give myself random kind of space where I'm not really thinking about it anymore, it will always come to me later. I feel like it happens to me a lot when I'm writing at home and then I'm driving to go pick up my kids for pickup. I feel like I'll always have an idea or a thought in the car when I'm on my way to pick them up, and it's just like my brain kind of is shut down and then something comes to me, and that was one of those moments at the end of the book. Yeah.
What do you do? Do you like have a notebook, or do you like text yourself? Or
I take notes on my iPhone. The notes app on my iPhone. I have like probably hundreds now of notes on there. And then I'm always writing it down there. And then next time I sit down, I'll kind of go back to it.
That's interesting.
I don't know. Yeah. Do you do that too? Or do you guys text
I
yourself
mean, I
or email
text
yourself?
myself, and it's like, but then I will read it later and I'm like, I have no idea what.
That's actually one thing I'm missing in this pandemic. I so rarely leave my house. Like I used to have a commute, and sometimes during the commute, I would walk to the train, take the train. I would force myself not to listen to anything and not to engage with my phone on the train, and just have like, 30 or 40 minutes to just reflect and think. And I would dedicate that time to thinking about my book. And I never do that anymore. I just don't have that moment in my day. I guess I could meditate for 30 or 40 minutes, like in the same room that I never leave, but it doesn't really have the same.
A dog. If you adopt a dog, and then you always have to be like,
right.
I'm going to take care of the dog.
Right.
Oh, I get to go walk the dog.
I could go brave the cold. I'm so not a fan of the cold. Go take a 30-minute walk. But I'm usually trying to hide from my kids who are downstairs with the sitter and who will cry when I walk past them out the door. I need like a second door to escape. Yeah.
Disguise or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a disguise.
I love this question. This is from Caroline Cates. And she says, thank you so much for this panel. It sounds like everyone here is trying to use their work in this genre to investigate the hidden parts of our world. Motherhood and fear, the opioid epidemic. I'm even reminded of Liz's book Heft with a so-called morbidly obese narrator, which is something we rarely see. What other hidden parts of the world are you hoping to explore in future work? I love that.
Very good question.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm currently obsessed with the the manipulation of that right-wing media is doing, and the impact of that right now, with this whole kind of like truth versus not truth, and how like a surprising number of like Americans, or I guess around the world, like are just willing to be, I don't know, just to be so singularly focused on one network and believe whatever it is. And so I'm kind of taking that to like a really dystopian place right now. I don't know if I'll end up doing anything with it, but I'm reading spending a lot of time with like people like Alex Jones from InfoWars, and like even like Tucker Carlson, and
have you read Talia Lavin's Cultural Warlords?
No.
So she goes undercover as like an alt-right. She goes undercover as a few things: an incel, an alt-right person, a kind of like blonde Republican right winger, and she goes on these message boards that are like a little dark webby, but she kind of uncovers that world even more. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I can barely like I can't go too far into it because it's so depressing. But so I think but I don't know. That's where I'm spending my time these days.
The book that I'm writing now, I can talk about only in a limited way because I'm still figuring it out. But I would say one of the themes in it is the lengths that sort of like rich people go to protect their own capital and their own interests, even if it involves covering something big up.
And that reminds me, when we were talking about the shows, a lot of the ones I mentioned, they're like Big Little Lies and A Simple Favor and The Undoing. All of them are very wealthy.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And all of them do have this terrible secret to cover up, and they kind of use their wealth and their kind of secret society or their clique to help them do that, which I think seems to be a theme that I've seen in a lot of these, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Good. I'm interested in my next book, exploring, I guess, a few different things that we don't always talk about, but one of them, I wanted to kind of explore the lives of women who are sort of in their early 40s and have sort of gotten to a point in life where it sort of feels like your life is what it is and there's not much more you can do about it. And the choices feel I think sometimes for women at that point in life, it sort of feels like there are no choices left. Like you have the marriage you have, you've got, you know, the socioeconomic status you have the children and the family you have. And what happens if at that point in life, you wish you'd made different choices, but feel like you can't, and sort of how hard is it to kind of change that, and how does that feel to kind of live with? But also, I think I sort of want to explore just the idea that maybe sort of within that context that, you know, good people can make bad choices. And, you know, the people that you would never expect to make the bad choices do, and especially when they feel like they're not going to get caught or when they're going to get away with it. And I like that kind of exploring that kind of moral space within the context of, you know, women at that point in their life, and friendships kind of between women, and sort of how envy can kind of play in that. So so that's sort of the world I'm exploring now in my second book. Yeah.
And is that the sequel or the second installment of the push?
No, it's different. It's totally different. It's called The Whispers. Yeah, and I'm going through revisions on it right now, which I'm enjoying. To Liz's point, when I can, when, in between the chaos of lockdown life at home. Yeah. So it's I think very much for the same reader, but a different world and different characters. Yeah.
Okay, my last question will be, what are you guys reading now, or what is something that maybe you read in 2020 or in lockdown that helped you get through? I know we were talking earlier about how, and I know a lot of people are like this, in a reading slump in the pandemic, and all you want to do is something kind of mindless, but what are you reading now, or what did you just read that you really loved?
I'm looking behind me at my bookshelf for inspiration. I read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which I always screw up, by Olga Tokarczuk, and now I'm reading Flights, which I'm enjoying. I think I'm on a kick of like books that explore nature in a gothic way, in sort of a scary way.
Oh,
I don't
cool.
know. I'll stop there. Those are two that I recommend.
Do you know the book Wintering?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was going to mention that book. Yeah.
I feel like that's like a book that like should get an award for best timing, but it's by woman Catherine May, and it's part memoir, it's part kind of natural exploration, like part like meditation on the human condition. But it looks at times of life where people winter, and in her terms, it's like any time of life that's difficult, or that you kind of need to just rest and retreat. And she looks a lot at nature, like hibernating bears and in trees that go dormant in the winter. And that's been really it's so beautifully written. So I would recommend that. And I did just like Lily King, her book, and Saint X, which my friend just gave that to me, which I feel like that's a book that came out, I think, in March, right before the pandemic. And if it weren't for the pandemic, it would have, we would have all be talking about it. But as somebody who released a book in October, like it's so hard to kind of wave your hands and, get seen. But that book, I think, is really fabulous.
Yeah, I would second that about the wintering. I loved it. I just loved it. And yes, perfectly timed. It could not have come out at a better time. What did I like recently? The book that kind of got me back into reading when I was kind of struggling at the beginning of the pandemic was Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. I don't know if you guys have read that, but it's so good. It's set it's a bit dystopian, but which I normally don't read, but I loved this book, and it's basically about a family who go upstate in New York, and they rent a home, like a vacation home, and are having a wonderful time there. And an older, very wealthy Black couple show up because they are the owners of the house, and they are asking basically for this family to let them stay there that night because there's something strange happening in Manhattan, and they don't know what it is. And it's such a good book about it's not so much a book about what's actually happening in Manhattan or in the world, but more about how we kind of cope with uncertainty and fear when so much is out of our control. And it's kind of, the whole thing is sort of complicated by sort of the race and class dynamics. And it's a really good read. And I think I read it in like days, and it pulled me right back into the mindset of wanting to read again. And a book that I'll mention that I loved, that to your point, Amy, about books that came out right at the beginning of the pandemic, and kind of I feel like this is one book that I feel like never had a fair shot because it came out at the beginning of the year. It's called How a Woman Becomes a Lake by Marjorie Salona. And she is an incredible writer. Her first book was called Why, that came out a few years ago. And this book is also a psychological thriller, but quite literary. And it's about a girl that goes missing, or woman that goes missing. Her story is sort of paralleled with a little boy who has something to do with it, but you're not quite sure what, and sort of his kind of home situation and how the families end up kind of being connected. And it's a fantastic read, and I highly recommend it. And I wish for her that it hadn't come out at that time because I know it's so hard. But hopefully it will find another life maybe next year in paperback.
Well, thank you all so much for doing this. Everyone, scroll up in the chat and you will find links to all of the books. If you've read one and liked it, I promise you will like the others. So definitely go out and get them, especially before they hit screens so you can read the book first. But congratulations on all of your success, ladies. I was so glad to have you here, and best of luck with the rest of your tour, Ashley, especially, and on developing all of your TV shows and movies and fun things.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
having
much
us.
for hosting. Thanks. All right. Bye,
Happy
everyone.
Pub Day, Ashley.
Happy Pub
Thank
Day. Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Congrats.